together for the lovely Jim.
Thank you, Perry, for a great first hour. So, I'm Jay Diamond. I've got so much to get through, so I've got my iPad, as you can see, so I'm going to kind of be going through here. Now, we did have some slides. I've got someone there. I'm going to give it a go. We'll see how that is. There's a video as well. I'm not sure if we'll be able to hear, but we'll just see how we go with it. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you? So anyway, I'm Jay Diamond. I'm an intuitive life coach and healer. And as a psychology graduate, I've got a background interest in brain and behaviour and neuropsychology. And from my work as a healer and a psychic, I've definitely seen the way our experiences shape our life and behaviour. And about 2 years ago, I started working with sacred plant medicines. Now, I just want to be really clear that by sacred plant medicines, I'm referring in particular to ceremonial ingestion of plants with psychoactive properties, specifically for the purpose of meeting with the divine, for prayer, for ceremonial purpose, for meeting with the spirit world, for healing. Plants like ayahuasca, iboga, San Pedro peyote, plants who've been used by indigenous peoples for thousands of years. It's been an absolutely incredible and transformative journey for me. And today I really want to explore the role of plant medicine and sexuality. Now, sexuality in general, and then in particular relation to sexual assault, because its effects are extremely complex and challenging, and I feel that plant medicines could have a really special role to play in helping people heal from very traumatic events in a way that doesn't seem to be paralleled in other methods, certainly not at least with the speed and the depth that these medicines work at. Hold on, I'm getting hot now, I need to take this off. I didn't think it would take long. So, sex is something everybody's fascinated with. Products are sold with it, industries are built on it, we're constantly bombarded with a barrage of sexual words, films, sexual images through our media, and we think, generally most of us think about it throughout the day, love to hear gossip about it. But if you try and challenge people's ideas about sex, people can get very defensive. Today, sex usually happens as a function of the mind. To be a spiritual act or an act of love is really something that's generally seen as either reserved for the very religious or the newlywed, basically. And so, I think most of us would agree that in our culture there have been lots of distortions related to sexuality. You know, our children are becoming sexualised at a much younger age than ever before. Being gay in public spaces is still something that can be quite dangerous at times. And also, women are still being continually objectified in all forms of media. Now, I feel that our current culture is taking the sacredness out of sex and sexual energy altogether. And we live in a culture that tells us that sex is just physical. So it doesn't really matter what you're doing or who you're doing it with. You know, love and respect might be something that happens, but it's certainly not necessary. And I guess I feel this is a bit of a sorry state of affairs, because I really feel that sexual energy is very, very powerful. It's the creative energy of life itself. And it's certainly not that I think we should be Puritan about it, in fact far from it, because, you know, on the other end of the spectrum, you know, so much shaming has happened around sex as well, and that's not where I'm going with this at all. You know, but we don't exist without sexual energy. We can really use its potency to really nourish and enrich the body. The references to the importance of sexual energy can be found in religious material all over the world. So whether that's Hindu Kundalini teachings, Egyptian pharaohs who would wear serpent headdresses, again to kind of refer to the Kundalini rising, the Holy Grail stories, as well as Tantric, Buddhist and Taoist teachings. So, when we're happy and healthy, and without shame or hurt, or using sex to power the ego, or to mask insecurities, it can be a really beautiful act of devotion. And it's been used for centuries to enhance spiritual awakening. So, most of us enjoy happy, healthy sex lives, and long may that last. However, sexual relationships and problems between men and women and same-sex couples are very, very common. Sexual abuse, ambivalence, premature ejaculation, impotence, inability to orgasm, the list goes on. In fact, you know, this is the first time I'm doing this talk publicly in the way that I'm doing it, and the amount of mails I've received is unbelievable on an absolute range of topics, not what I was expecting at all. So there's something going on in this area that, anyway, we'll get to that, that's very, very much undiscussed, unhealed, and needs to be heard and overturned, let's say. So, yeah, that's my reason for doing it. I think we need a very much more open conversation about sex, sexuality, sexual trauma, and healthy, happy human interaction. And I really believe very deeply in the power of the human spirit to heal. And plant medicines for me have been the most deepest and transformative of healers and teachers. I really want to share my experience with you and open just a general conversation about healing that we can take back into our lives, that perhaps will have a really profound and positive effect on someone else. So we're going to start this conversation, which, yes, the conversation initially will be one way, and at the end you'll have lots of opportunity to ask questions, and we can have a two-way conversation, you know, when we get into exploring this. But at the beginning, I really want you just to have a look at your own choices about sex and where they come from. And also we'll talk about how sexual trauma can affect relationships, whether that's happened to you or not, and how plant medicines can really heal some of the science behind it. Also, we're going to look at the possible impact across generations, and there's a lot of really great scientific experiments that are talking about cross-generational trauma now as well, which I find really interesting. So it might seem a little bit of an odd question, but where do your sexual choices come from? Well, how you act and interact sexually and in romantic relationships has everything to do with your personal history. Whether you believe, you know, whatever you believe relationships are about, whether you even trust other people on a deeper level, who you are and who you're with and how you feel about yourself and the other person in that sexual interaction is different for everyone. You know, your family, your religion, your parents' relationship, your own experiences as you were exploring your sexuality growing up will all impact how you feel about sex and then how you continue with it. So your impotence might be nothing to do with your physical biology, your physical body, but an emotional reaction to what you saw growing up, or your current lack of self-confidence. So all of these things can feed in, and you can either make really, really good decisions based on these things about who you choose to have sex with and who you choose to date, or quite frankly, your decisions might be dire. So it really just does depend. So perhaps you're avoiding intimacy, or you're completely attached to it. Lots of people have a sex addiction. It's not as uncommon as you think. So, you know, just go straight for the kill. Let's just go straight in there. Something to consider. And as, you know, I am an energy worker, and I will have lots of different types of, you know, communicate with lots of different types of energy workers. Something to consider, and that many different types of energy workers say, is that when you actually have sex with someone, your energy field becomes connected to theirs, and you can actually draw from you can pick up psychic debris, and that can really interfere with your clarity, your peace, and you can unknowingly pick up the energy of their chaos, their confusion, their anger, and this can negatively influence you. So some practitioners will say this will remain in your body for years, and others will say it only remains for a few weeks. Well, either way, the concept that when your physical body disengages, your emotional body or your spiritual body doesn't disengage at the same time is something to really consider. Do you want to carry the energy of that person around with you for a while? Do you want them drawing on your energy for a length of time after you've had sex with them? It's something to consider. So working with the sacred plant medicines like ayahuasca, iboga, San Pedro, peyote, effectively brings you back home to your true, authentic self. They release layers of conditioning, learned behaviour that you've built up over the years. Ways of thinking and behaving that do not serve you are healed and changed. Relationships can definitely improve. You find yourself becoming more authentic, communicating better with your partner. You find yourself being attracted to people who are better for you because you've got better self-esteem. And you find that you can ask for what you need and better express yourself sexually. Plant medicines get right to the heart of the matter, healing on an emotional, spiritual and biological level like nothing else I've ever experienced. So what's good can be made really great, and what's hurt can be made really whole. So let's focus now a little bit more on how sexual trauma affects relationships and sex, whether that's happened to you or not. A huge issue facing many people is sexual assault, and that's just as it is, you know, as a child or as an adult. Now, sexual assault at any age can have devastating effects on confidence, on body image, the ability to actually feel safe in the world, your sex life, relationships. Actually, it can permeate all areas of your life. It doesn't have to stay that way, but it can. And if you were sexually assaulted as a child, you are still forming your sense of identity. And actually your whole beliefs about the world. So what will happen is the child will adapt to what feels like a malevolent world. And the stress hormones can actually flood the child's hippocampus. The part of the brain that regulates emotion means that adult survivors are more likely to be highly stressed, have difficulties with anger and emotion, be prone to anxiety and self-harm. It literally changes the brain chemicals. So the reality is child abuse remains prevalent, and we're just at the tip of the iceberg now in finding out how you know, people in high places, positions of power and authority have been creating this in an organised way for a very long time. However, the reality is that most children are abused by someone that they know, and very often it's within the family. But because of the secrecy, the shame and the social stigma that goes with it, most of it goes unreported, undiscussed and unhealed, and that needs to change. So it's an extremely complex situation that can be compounded or revealed by many factors, and I've definitely seen this work as an energy healer, but also as a friend and of course in my own life. In 2013, the UN stated that 1 in 3 women experience physical or sexual violence of some kind, and that's mostly from an intimate partner. The NSPCC state on reports from authorities 1 in 20 children in the UK have been sexually abused, but they do also state this is based on legal reports, and of course the vast majority of cases go unreported. In the US, they estimate 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys, which is a lot, and I have no evidence to prove it, but my spidey sense is telling me that in the next 10 years I think we're going to see a lot more boys coming forward, because I think that with the boys it goes much more unreported because of the increased social stigma. The UK Ministry of Justice estimates 69,000 female and 9,000 male rape cases a year, although only 15,500 become police-recorded crimes. So that's the depressing part. So as you can see, the statistics are pretty shocking. And if you haven't yourself experienced this, there's a very high likelihood that someone you know has, or that you've been in some sort of relationship with, whether that's a friend, whether that's your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, your cousin. It's very unlikely that you won't know anyone at all who's experienced this. And it's well documented that sexual assault can be so damaging, it can result in substance abuse, depression, PTSD, anxiety, eating disorders and suicide. And as you can imagine, forming positive relationships with partners can be extremely difficult. If you've got a partner who's been sexually assaulted, it can cause problems in your relationships that you perhaps don't understand, and they don't even know how to explain to you. Now, of course, there are a number of therapeutic routes available to heal sexual trauma, but I really want to look at plant medicines for numerous reasons. The main one being, I think it really moves the needle in terms of healing any kind of trauma. So we're going to go into the science of it, and I'm going to break it down best I can. There are a few studies, particularly around the effects of ayahuasca, and of course the effects of ibogaine from iboga, which is one of the substances that's in iboga, in treating substance abuse, has been fairly well documented. But there's also a very long way to go, because it's such a difficult area, because the legal and the sensitive nature of these plant medicines, and also the spiritual nature of them as well. You know, a lot of medicine creates shifts in the human heart that science can probably never explain, but I'm really glad that they're having a go. So, Dr. Reba et al. Found that ayahuasca creates neural brain activity that deals with emotional processing. So it activates the hippocampus, and that triggers old memories, but it also increases serotonin transmission, which is the hormone that makes you feel good, and that means it can allow the recall of memories without being overwhelmed. This is vital for the ability to process and release without incurring further trauma. So I had this experience where after a number of times of working with the medicine, I was taken back to recall memories in order that they didn't hold any power over me anymore. And that I literally was able to have a dialogue with the medicine, where the medicine would literally say, and I could see where, where this was going. I was like, really? Do we really need to revisit this? Don't really want to. But the point was so that it wouldn't hold power over me. And it was uncomfortable, but it wasn't unbearable. So this would make sense, like with terms of the increased serotonin. The whole point of the medicine is to heal, not to traumatize, not to hurt, but to create changes within your physical body, but mind, body and spirit, so that you can feel better. So it didn't happen the first few times that I worked with the medicine. It was, in fact, it was quite a little while down the road working with the medicines. This was my main fear coming to the medicine, or any plant medicine. What would I see? I think for most of us, whatever our experiences are, what will I see? What will I feel? Will I be too overwhelmed? I thought, no way, Jesus, don't let me go back to any of that. I don't want to see it, don't want to feel it. So that was my main fear in coming to the medicine. And it actually wasn't as bad as I thought. In this case, it was the ayahuasca that I worked with. So again, the purpose of the medicine is to heal. It's not to shock, it's not to scare, but it's to bring you back into alignment with who you truly are. And it was almost all practices. I'm just in the middle, we're going to do questions at the end.
But just before you go on, could you just go back a bit and say why you got involved with these and where you've done that and where you're
I don't talk about who I've worked with or where. There'll be questions at the end. Yeah, thanks. So, anyway, where was I to? Yeah. So that was working with the ayahuasca. So I've worked with lots of different types of medicines, but in this specific instance, this is how I had this particular experience. So whereas antidepressants like Prozac or antipsychotics such as lithium will work to try and suppress emotion in order to try and stabilise it, the plant medicine will actually seek to heal the underlying causes of any imbalances. So our Western medicines are amazing and really fantastic for helping us with our physical body symptoms, and the plant medicines are really, really great for helping us really look at the underlying cause as well as the physical body symptoms. In '93, Dr. Grove of UCLA conducted an experiment which is called Ayahuasca Project, where participants using ayahuasca this is just amazing, experienced remission without recurrence of their addictions, depression or anxiety disorders. And the study also showed that ayahuasca seems to give us a greater sensitivity to serotonin. And check this out, by actually increasing the number of serotonin receptors on nerve cells, meaning more of that happy chemical can actually be felt and received. It's literally recalibrating the chemical structure of the brain. So I love how science is starting to investigate these powerful medicines. It feeds my geek, which I love. And it's about, I love it. I love how they're starting to catch up now, with what traditional healers and indigenous healers have been doing for the last 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years, But we mustn't take it out of its spiritual context, because a lot of what the medicine teaches is about the sacredness of life, your life, all life. And that in itself can provide a very, very profound healing experience. What we're missing strongly in the West is the connection to our earth, and it's having dire consequences. So during the medicine ceremonies, you can reclaim parts of you that were lost through trauma. And that might be the ability to even trust life itself, to trust people. You can reclaim your self-esteem, your ability to love and be loved. Dr. Reber also found that ayahuasca hyperactivates the neocortex. So if you can actually see this, that's the red bit at the top there, that's where the neocortex is. And that's the part of the brain where we reason, perceive, and we make decisions. And it also activates the amygdala, which is the tiny little brown pea bit inside. And that's kind of where the emotional memories or significant emotional memories are stored. And it activates the insular cortex, which creates the bridge between our emotions and emotional impulses and decision making. So really what that actually means is there's something going on around emotional memories, how we make decisions, and how we see the world. This reflects the testimonials from people who say they feel that they healed from past trauma and notice that they think and feel differently. After working with the plant medicines, they feel better. They make decisions that support them rather than hurt them because they're literally starting to think differently. With the plant medicine, the healing occurs so that your decision making can be based more on your present information. I'm lost. Oh yeah. Based on your present information, not overridden by the emotional and traumatic past that causes a stress response in the brain. So stress responses, fears and aggressions can be triggered, making chemical responses in your body that you have no control over because you're not consciously aware that your body's trying to cope. So you just react and you do what you've always done. The brain makes sense of whatever's happening now based on its past experiences. So you understand the world based on your past experiences. That's how the brain works. It will always take reference from something that's happened before unless we start to kind of, refigure or rewire the brain, so to speak, in different ways. There are many different ways of doing that. I believe plant medicines is one that works in a very, very quick way. The human animal basically is just, we're always trying to avoid pain and gain pleasure. And neuroscience tells us that the nerve cells that fire together, wire together, meaning if you repeatedly act and think in the same way every day, your brain becomes hardwired to support that. Basically meaning, if every day you believe that today's a shit day, tomorrow's going to be a shit day too, and you continually think that, it's easier for your brain to go in that direction. It's like when you take a shortcut and you walk in the grass, and eventually the grass goes and there just becomes a bit of a path. You don't even need to think about where that path goes, you just walk down that path because they fire and wire together. So every time something comes up, immediately you're going to go down that pathway, that emotional pathway. And what the plant medicines can do is help you to rewire so that you're not automatically going down into depression, you're not automatically going into panic, you're not automatically going into anger. And it can literally be transformative in that way. Okay, so it might not happen overnight, but it can change. The medicines allow the thinking in the conscious and the unconscious part of the brain to override those old patterns and fire and wire in new ways, as I was saying. So memories might emerge, realizations might occur, and it can really enable you to make better decisions about your life and who you actually believe yourself to be, because something's happening where the subconscious isn't running the show anymore. You can break out of limiting behaviour, and that's the gift of the medicine. The conditioned responses that you've had perhaps all of your life and the beliefs that you hold, as in this, it's like a whole worldview, this is the way the world is, this is what people do, this is what my experience is, this is what I'm capable of, all of that can be broken for the better. The sacred medicines can give you insights into your maladaptive behaviour and help you change it. So it's not just showing you why you do that thing that hurts you, why you choose a partner that abuses you, why you choose, why you cheat on the person that you love over and over again so they'll reject you, why you run for the hills as soon as someone says they love you, but you become healed of it too. So it's not just information to say, oh okay, look, this is what it is, although sometimes that's what happens. You can actually change as well. Like you get, like Perry was saying, there's a change of heart. So, and what's really interesting is that quite often these are behaviours that were previously hidden or denied from yourself. So when something's in the subconscious and it's hidden or denied, you're projecting it, you don't even know you're doing it, then it's almost impossible to heal. You know, the medicines can really shine light on where you're working against yourself. And it heals the root of the pain that caused it, so you don't keep acting it out anymore. This is what Dr. Jung would call the shadow. And what we do is we call that shadow back home and love it back into the heart, rather than keep rejecting that part. What do I keep pressing here? Rather than keep, you know, rejecting that part of ourselves. What we do is we project it out, we create relationships and jobs and situations that keep reflecting this pain back to us, because it's always a call to heal. Well, we can stop doing that when we hold that shadow aspect and love it back into our being. Now, I really believe in the power of good psychotherapy, and my experience is that these medicines can work so much quicker. And at a level of the soul, and even like wider human cosmology than just on the level of the mind. So we have a mind, a body, and a soul, and I think it's really important to consider all of these things in our healing. Many people who work with plant medicines will very openly tell you that it's like having years of therapy in one night. And that's definitely my experience. I've had many different types of therapy, and all of them have been very useful, but it's really been the plant medicines that really moved me on a deeper soul level. So I was sexually assaulted as a child and as a teenager, and like I say, I've received lots of good therapy, and yeah, and it helped me, you know, those therapies, different types of therapies really helped with my self-esteem. I had panic attacks, probably until I was in about my mid-20s occasionally, not all the time, but enough to be a problem. I had mild to moderate depression on and off. Again, I was never not functional, I was always managing to keep my life together, but I had severe dips when it came to emotions, and relationships-wise, well, yeah, there was a lot there that led to being designed, and things have improved dramatically. So, I want to tell you a private story, a little bit more about, you know, why I do the work that I do, and my experiences with the medicine. So, one day I was working with the Wachuma, which is the San Pedro medicine, a very powerful, beautiful teacher cactus plant. And there was a point during the ceremony where I felt this huge pain in my stomach, and I'd done a few ceremonies by this time, so I knew that something was really calling to be healed. And I had an amazing healer to help me. So I literally called the spirit of my dead grandfather, and it was my grandfather that abused me. And I brought his spirit to my side. This is what I felt the medicine was really calling for me to do. Like many miracles, it sounds a bit batshit crazy, but I can't tell you the story without telling you the truth of all of it, and that's what it was. And what I found was that there were energetic hooks that were still connecting my spirit to his spirit, even though he'd already passed. There was energetically still some connection, which was crazy to me because I'd done a lot of work on releasing this abuse stuff. A lot of, I am not afraid of deep spiritual work, trust me. And I was like, really? This shit again? Do I really have to go there? But what I've found and what I've experienced with myself, and by seeing lots of other different people through their healing, is that we tend to go back to issues in a cyclical motion when we're ready to go that little bit deeper. And what was happening was I was ready to go that little bit deeper. And what I saw is that these energetic hooks were sort of connected to my last bit of resistance, my last bit of forgiveness. I wasn't ready to kind of forgive fully. The last parts of me that were still saying, why? Why did this happen to me? Why should this happen to anyone? This shouldn't have happened. And so, essentially, it's questioning what is. When you're in, not even denial, but when you resist what is, then there's always going to be a point of energy that won't flow. Well, I can't just be in acceptance. And it was time to let it go once and for all. So like I say, I thought I had, but obviously there was some more work to be done. These energetic hooks to him needed to be released. And in that ceremony, I literally called back my power. So the power that I'd given over and was never returned to me as an 8-year-old child was actually returned back into my body. And it was like this. And like a gush of air had literally come through my body, and I gasped, and I was like, oh my God, I've got my life back. And I had no idea that anything actually needed to change. Until that point, it wasn't like I felt I was carrying some sort of weight, because I'd already done a lot of work. But actually, in that moment, a huge weight lifted from me. I felt a spaciousness in my whole body and spirit that I'd not felt before. And I felt a sense of freedom, actually, that I hadn't felt before. And I don't think there's any study or any brain scan that could really measure that. I don't think there's any scientific experiment that could show what happened to me that day, but the shift in my being, my person, who I am, is evident. And after that, the medicine showed me, because I was open and willing, how I had lacked compassion to men. The medicine showed me my attitudes, how I had been in my relationships sometimes, not always, but sometimes with men, because of my distrust, because of my anger, because of how hurt I was. And let me tell you how I grieved for that, how I grieved for that distortion that happened between me and men. Does that make sense? The things that happened to me had distorted everything that I saw, because then after that, of course, as a self-fulfilling prophecy, I continually would see and attract men who would reinforce that belief. And you only have to turn on the TV and the news to see all the terrible things that happen in the world. And it wasn't that I couldn't see great men, because I could. But I couldn't really let it sit into my heart, like it wouldn't really sit. And what happened was, after this particular ceremony, my whole concept shifted in a very deep and dramatic way, because I didn't have the resistance there anymore, I wasn't holding that. And so to be in a place where I was actually willing and able to go to that level of healing, I owe that to plant medicines, without a doubt. And I was also reminded and shown that in our lives, you can be hurt by someone else and it's not personal. You can just literally be in the way of their dysfunction. You might be in the way of someone else's soul sickness, and you happen to be there while they're acting it out. Now, this is a really nice intellectual concept. So as an adult, you can say, I know that's not my fault if someone murders someone, or if someone, commits a sexual assault. It's not the other person's fault. You can believe that intellectually, and I did believe that intellectually most of my life. But what was happening was, I believed it to be true, but in my heart, I didn't fully believe it for myself. So I believed it as a concept, but I didn't believe it in my heart, if that makes sense. And what happened was, the medicine shifted on a soul level, where I could really sit with that belief. Not just say it, not just believe it in the mind, but like in the heart, on a very deep level. I've got it. People are just acting out their stuff. I just happen to be around, born into that family, and there you have it. Does that make sense? I really shifted from that intellectual concept. So, healing the bloodline. There's a lot of, in many medicine healing ceremonies, there's a lot of talk about what's called healing the bloodline. And that's the concept and experience of healing wounds passed down to you through generations that actually very often stay outside of your conscious awareness. So it might actually appear to you as a physical illness or a heaviness or a depression that arises from time to time. Certainly in ayahuasca circles, there's talk that we're healing 7 generations forward and 7 generations back. Well, that could be a mammoth task. And we have the opportunity to break unhealthy patterns of anger, repression, fear, denial, and shame that have been passed for many years from parent to child, from parent to child, from parent to child. During ayahuasca ceremonies, I've had the experience of immense emotional grief and emotional pain, like nothing I've actually ever experienced in my life. Deep deep tears and sorrow lasting literally hours. And what was happening in this one particular ceremony was that I could literally feel women of different ages grieving through me. So I had this experience where I felt, I can only explain it to you as best I can, I felt I was a grandmother. I could feel energetically that I was around, say, 50 years old. So there was something going on where there was a knowingness that I was experiencing being in the body of an old woman, or an old woman was experiencing being in the body of me. And I believe this is ancestral healing taking place with the power of the ayahuasca. And afterwards I was also assisted to remove energy that was stuck very, very deep in my stomach. And again I was literally engulfed with this very, very deep pain and grief. And what I released when I purged, when I puked, was that this was extremely ancient. And I remember saying, oh my God, that was ancient. I just knew it. It felt so old and so deep, and not necessarily from me either. And when I worked with the peyote, I purged woundings of the heart that had been passed down through my parents, and had been passed to them from their parents. And these are the kinds of messages or like knowingness you can get when you work with the medicine. You get the deepest of insights. Sometimes you're able to go check that out with family members, and it can really ring true. And sometimes it's just a real strong knowingness within yourself. I'm just going to say a little word on DNA, because the DNA is like a package, basically, the DNA that we all have is like a package of instructions of how to make a living being, another living person. And it replicates itself over and over again in reproduction. Oh shit, pressed something wrong, hold on. So it replicates itself over and over again and creates another person, obviously. For that. So the DNA's got the full instructions basically of making a person, and it actually holds the whole living history of what came before it. Now from an evolutionary perspective that would make total sense, right? And many people after a traumatic event or even losing a loved one, if you ever lost someone that you really love, will say, I've never been the same since. Or you might know someone who's lost someone that they love or has undergone some sort of really traumatic event, and you might say, gosh, John's never been the same since. Because some people really aren't the same after those experiences. Now, epigenetic specialist Rachel Yehuda explains through epigenetics how trauma can actually change you and is passed on to the next generation. So she's a professor of psychiatry and neuroscience, and she's got a team of people. And what they did is they studied 32 Jewish men and women who'd been kept in a Nazi concentration camp and witnessed or experienced torture or had to hide during the Second World War. And their children were more likely to have stress disorders than Jewish families who were living outside of Europe during the war. And what they did is they looked at one particular gene that was known to be associated with stress. And what they found was epigenetic tags on the very same part of this gene in both the Holocaust survivors and their offspring, but the correlation wasn't found in the control group or their children. So the epigenetic tags, what that does is it switches the genes on or off. So if your stress tag, let's say, on that epigenetic gene of stress, is turned all the way on, and then you have children, it would kind of make sense that they would be more prone to stress, wouldn't it? So you can see how an anxiety disorder might develop for them. So the DNA holds the information about how to make a human, but the epigenetics decides what information is shared when and how. So from another kind of perspective, I've seen this in my healing work where someone comes to me with a heart-related condition, and when I worked on it, it was actually rooted in the horror of the Holocaust. So she's part Jewish, and this particular heart condition runs through her father line, which is the Jewish part. And it was the energy of the horror that had actually created an imbalance in the physical body that had then gone down through, well, this was third generation then. Scientists at Emory University in Atlanta trained male mice to fear the smell of cherry blossom by pairing it with an electric shock, and their offspring, despite having never encountered the smell of cherry blossom, showed a fearful response to the smell, and so too did some of their children. So that's, again, third generation. They'd only have to smell cherry blossom, they were absolutely crapping it. Well, you know, they said it was a mystery, they couldn't explain it, we don't know why it's happened, it's no big bloody mystery to me. You know, the parents, the grandparents have been absolutely terrified, and somehow, but this is in the genetics, it's not a learned behaviour, they've not seen it, it's not because they've seen a fearful response. What actually they found was that in this third generation of mice, they even had more cherry blossom smell receptors. So their biology had adapted to danger. Now, in an evolutionary kind of way, it makes sense, right? If you've got a dangerous environment, that you can adapt quicker, that you can sense quicker. The reason I say this is that because trauma can pass down, there might be things going on with you in your system, your experiences, your feelings, your emotions, don't actually root in your experience. There might be an experience of a grandparent that's showing up in your life. Does that make sense? So basically put, really, it's not just wonky teeth and diabetes that can be passed down from grandma. It could actually be something, you know, quite a bit more challenging. And while it's commonly accepted that diet and chemicals can change epigenetics or change the biology of a child, it's only just sort of starting to be more commonly accepted that emotions can also change epigenetics. Even though there are these studies, most hard scientists don't really like it, even though the studies are showing it anyway. Anyway, that's changing. But these are things our traditional healers have known for eons. They're just starting to be discovered by science, and science is starting to put a bit of chemical and biological language in around what some of us would call soul wounds. So the repressed and unhealed pain of your great-grandparents could, in fact, be affecting you somehow. And collectively, these plant medicines are helping us to heal the pain body of the planet. And I just really wanted to show you this little graph. I don't know if you can really see it, but shame and guilt are emotions that feature very heavily after sexual assault, not just in victims, but also sometimes in the perpetrators. And psychiatrist Sir David Hawkins created a scale of human consciousness. Shame is the lowest vibration. The lowest vibration of human consciousness, and the highest form will be enlightenment, and there's a hell of a gap in between. So when we're clearing these kinds of issues, that are some of the lowest vibration on the planet, we're creating huge changes. And as we make these changes, I believe they start to quicken. But also it's time. We've definitely been called to evolve. We've definitely been called to wake up and let that shit go. So when I worked with the African plant Iboga, I struck up with a really good conversation with the plant right away, which was nice. And the plant told me very quickly the name of the person who began a particularly violent line of paedophilia in the family a number of generations ago. So my own grandfather, who had abused me as a child, had abused perhaps hundreds, almost certainly hundreds of boys and girls in schools and borstalls across the country. And this had passed down through the generations, and when it arrived at me, emotionally and spiritually, I had also absorbed the pain and suffering suppressed in that abuser, but also somehow I was shown the pain and energy of those, many of those that he'd abused before, which takes a stretch. I know, but it's mind-blowing, but being shown this made sense to me because I always felt that I was carrying emotionally a far greater than my own experience. So my own personal experience was more than enough to give me a hard time, just create a lot of personal problems, anxiety, depression, blah, 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 blah. But I always had this feeling that there was something else, because what was happening is in my other medicine ceremonies, in my healings, just arising in itself, this great sense of horror would arise, this great sense of fear would suddenly arise within me. And it felt kind of unmatched to my own personal experience. So the medicine really showed me that yes, there was more going on. Yes, I had absorbed a psychic energy bodies, especially if you're empathic. You can absorb many kinds of energies. And in this ceremony, the African planet showed me what was going to happen, so that further along in the night, there would be a lot of physical discomfort, and it kind of gave me like a psychic image of writhing around on the floor, and I could see that there was going to be a really strong healing. But what was happening was, the plant was preparing me so that when that time came, I wasn't afraid, wasn't scared, I was just ready to let it go. And I really felt that medicine working in my body. I felt like there was a hand that was twisting in my gut. Can you imagine someone going through your belly button and like really going twisting it? That's how it felt. But it was almost like I was outside myself watching this as well. I wasn't afraid. It was uncomfortable, but it wasn't unmanageable, because the medicine had already told me, okay, this is what's going to happen, this is what we're going to do, we're going to shift it. I was kind of quite happy with that. So it was shifting the memory of my cellular structure. It was shifting generationally all this pain that moved through. And if you have a sort of that very linear mind, I mean, you know, I work as a psychic and a healer, this is my realm, so it's much easier for me to get my head around. But if you can sort of grasp, you know, emotionally what had been passed down from one generation to the next, it was shifting this out of the cellular structure, the memory in my cells. That's how deep it was working. You know, and although I felt horrendous as I was throwing up and I was writhing around, and there was also a part of me that was like, yeah, God, fuck off, get out, you don't belong here. And then I kind of cried and you know, wobbled off back to my bed and kind of chilled out for a bit. So in this way, by healing with these secret plant medicines, you're not just healing yourself, and this is what's really important to remember. You're healing future generations, and even past on some level. Your work has a huge impact on your future children. Huge. Because you're clearing not only your own stuff, but ancestral wounds and karma. And without all of that, our children are going to be able to be freer, happier beings that creates beings of a light vibration in our minds, bodies and hearts. You know, when our ancestral bloodlines are healed of hurt, trauma, guilt, shame, the vibration of the whole planet will be elevated. And our planet has a very dense energy body, because we've been born into duality, we've been born into separation. We've been some very dark times on this planet. You know, we've all been born into families where, you know, nothing's perfect. That's the nature of the world that we live in. When we're doing this work, we're contributing to the clearing of the entire planet. This is what's helping with our elevation. And when we have children moving forward, and we can even affect them when they've already been born by our own healing, I really, really want you to kind of hold the weight of that, you know, that your own work really does affect other people. And that's why I do a lot of womb healing work with women, because as the carriers of new life, and in terms of creating a new earth, it's really imperative that we heal, clear this area. So you can go to my website if you're interested in any of that. It's jaydiamond.net. So there are many aspects that can influence the quality of relationships, and of course sex, but plant medicines heal our heart, mind and soul, which can only lead to better communication, higher self-esteem, better choices, and I do wonder, better orgasms, to be quite frank. Because without the insecurity and the fear and the masks, you know, it's amazing to see what kind of experiences we can have, and of course the ability to reconcile traumatic experiences is second to none with plant medicines. It's hard to imagine, if you've had that experience, how you could actually ever possibly heal from it. But you can. You really, really can. So although this kind of deep work isn't for everyone, and I really think it's really to be considerate of who you choose to work with. You know, if someone's suffering from a very strong PTSD or a mental health problem, then it might not be the best time to start working with plant medicines, maybe never, because it's not for everyone, but it might just be at that particular time. We also need to consider the sustainability as well. There's cropped up this, specifically around ayahuasca, like a tourism kind of thing, where people are just, oh, give that a go, and the medicines are being taken, not replenished. We need to really think about the sustainability of these things. But there's so much healing potential available with these medicines in relating to all areas. We just haven't got time to go into all of that, you know, around sexuality, gender issues, health, conscious conception, relationships, partner choices, of course sexual trauma, but also increasing sexual potential, evolution and enlightenment. And generally happier, healthier people. It's really time, I think, to reconnect back to our bodies and our hearts and the planet. And it's really my greatest wish. It really is that all beings are happy and free. So I'm Jay Diamond, the creatrix of the Sacred Woman Tribe. I hold mixed cacao ceremonies, which are plant spirit medicine ceremonies, but that are non-psychoactive and legal, which is nice. And I've got a sign-up sheet over there, you can pop your information down. And we do lots of different type of work. Sometimes we'll just have a celebration kind of ceremony where we just dance and we sing and we have fun. Other times we'll do like more healing type work. What else? I do a lot of work, in particular with women. I do activation sessions, which are for both men and women, where I do intuitive, actually read cards, and I do intuitive life coaching with both men and women. That's jaydiamond.net. But I do a lot of work specifically with women. I have a group on Facebook called the Sacred Woman Tribe, where we exchange lots of information. So I know there's a shitload of information that I've gone through today, and I really want to kind of bring together not just like the story of plant medicines. You know, we can hear people talk about their experiences, which are profound, but there's a very strong scientific basis for this. I think it's really powerful and informational that we are really considerate about the cross-generational effects of trauma, and that actually we can do something about it. We can do something. So if you've got any questions, I'd be so happy to hear them and talk. And I have a couple of boundaries. The first one is, as an abuse survivor, I don't welcome people's horror stories by email or by Facebook message, or tapping me on the shoulder and telling me all the terrible things that have happened to you. I do work with people on a one-to-one, and I do help people as best I can, but yeah, you know, be aware around triggering. And the second is, I don't make, and this is why I had to say this with the lady before, you know, I don't make any recommendations about who to work with. As far as you're concerned, you know, I don't know anybody who does this work. I won't discuss where I did it, what country. It's very important for me that we protect our medicine people in all ways, and I hope you really respect that. So just with that boundary, I really welcome any questions that you might have.
We might have to do some reviews in the green on the one-to-one.
Yeah, come and you can come and find me as well. Find me on Facebook, the Sacred Woman Tribe.
I've had a lot of talks on ayahuasca before. I'm really interested to do it. But I think the one thing that scares me is the horror stories of, I know that you have to vomit and all of that, but you know, you hear about people in the press dying from it. Is that because they're overtaking it, or is that something that can happen? So just kind of explain. So we obviously say all the great things that can happen, but I hear a lot of that.
Yes, and you know, I sort of didn't shy away from telling the difficult stuff. I went right back into my abuse experiences as well, and had to face that, but that wasn't straight away. So the first thing I want to really address is about the fear of death. I don't know anyone, well, most people have that fear when we go to work with the medicine. What if I die? Shit, what if I die? And even in the medicine ceremony, what if this is it? And actually, it is horror stories that are created by the media. With the ayahuasca in particular, there's a dieta. So there's been a couple of people that died working with iboga, and usually that's because you're not supposed to take it with any drug. And a lot of people who go to the iboga are actually drug addicts, and what they'll do is they'll sneak heroin or crack or something like that, and it will have an adverse effect with the medicine. So you're asked to follow a dieta, and in particular, yes, there's SRIs that are a problem, but you take antidepressants. You don't take the antidepressants, you follow the dieta, you'll be fine. If you had any heart condition, you would always speak to, and that's why it's really important to talk to people and do research about how you work with. Now, there have been a couple of people that have died, and well, they're literally a couple out of hundreds of thousands. These medicines have been used for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and they haven't been traditionally fatal. And if you think about that compared with the number of deaths that people take from overdosing on painkillers, it's incomparable. But because these medicines are new and a lot of people in the West are very afraid of them for various reasons, and because they are a threat to pharmaceutical companies, anything that challenges, like with with cannabis, me personally, it's not like I'm a big smoker or anything like that, but it was demonised because it has a lot of healing properties that challenges the pharmaceutical industry. And I do believe these medicines should be respected and approached with a real deep reverence and respect. If you're shaman saying, don't eat this, don't eat it. Don't, this is the thing where we come with a Western mentality thinking that we can bring our own Western thinking and take up something that's been practiced for 3,000 years in another way. If you follow the directions, you'll be fine. And it's normal to have fear and a healthy respect in that kind of way that you are going to meet with the divine. And it is a bit scary. You don't know what will happen. So that's about the death thing. I hope that helps. And what was the other bit that you said? The purging. Fear. That's the main. Yeah, that's the main thing for most of us. Am I going to die? I hope not.
Do you mind if I say something about this actually? Yes, there has been people that have died in the jungle, but what you've got to understand is the spiritual wars going on over there now in Amazon, because this sacred plant medicine is now worth a lot of money over there. So you've got a lot of shaman that shouldn't be practicing, that they're not shaman, they're called the brujos. And the problem is, right, ayahuasca is safe. It's a different type of plant that they'll use in the brew, which is called toy. Now, you could take toy and be totally fine. You could take it and have a really bad reaction with it. It mimics the effect of ayahuasca, but it is not ayahuasca. It's something completely different. It has a dark energy attached to it. So, basically what I'm going to say is, if anybody is thinking about going to the jungle, speak to me, because my friend has an amazing retreat and he's not making medicine with toy in, he's making ayahuasca, which is safe, but definitely what Jay is saying about the diet, it's important, but if you mess up on the diet, it's not going to kill you. Sorry. It's not going to kill you.
Could be really,
but you've got to make sure that the person that you're going to drink ayahuasca with knows what they're doing. Basically. Carry on. Who's got
this guy in the middle.
I think we've got time for this.
Yeah, you're right. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your talk today, because it's actually, I resonate with it quite highly. I have a question, but I sort of need to put it into context, if you see what I mean, because I had an experience very recently, and I haven't even sort of told anyone in my family about it, so it's a bit strange to sort of take room for the people. But, well, basically what it was I met this woman online who was supposed to meet, and I was quite excited about it. It seemed normal. It was rather nefarious in nature because she was married, and so we had to keep it on the down low. And I spent about a week preparing to meet with her. And the night before I was supposed to meet with her, I had a very interesting experience. I was in the bathtub, and it's like something just opened up. I can only attribute it to some form of divine intervention of sorts, but just I went into a sort of mildly visionary state, and I could see quite clearly the energetic connections that if I had indulged in this particular thing, how it would have affected me, how it would have affected those around me as well. And I was really, ultimately my position was split. So at one minute I was really excited, like, yeah, it's going to be great, and then the next minute was like, oh no, she looked at it with disgust. And I mean, I had a follow-on question with that. It was how do you differentiate between sort of who's right for you and sort of who's right within the moment. But then, thinking about that as you were speaking, I saw the answer within myself, because it doesn't matter who I ask, it has to something that I come to within myself. But then another question emerged out of that one, which in relation, because I've taken the plant medicine quite a few times, different sorts of peyote, ayahuasca, candid, and so forth. And what I've noticed with people, because you have very profound experience with it, and I know lots of people within this sort of circle, and what they do is always the same. It's like you go to ayahuasca for healing, and you get healed, and you have this amazing transcendental experience, and you're energetically high. Things, you fall into synchronicity in your life, you're in the flow and everything, but then what happens is it's almost like you become detached, and you run back a few months later, and you're back at another ceremony again. And the same sort of process repeats itself over and over. So I suppose my question really is, how do you awaken or activate that essence within yourself that is who
practice? You know, hearing, I think what I'm hearing is, you know, how many times do I have to go back to the medicine, or is it appropriate to keep going back to the medicine? How do I bring that into my daily life? The medicine generally, whatever medicine you work with, quite often will give you a homework. And some people have said that if you haven't done your homework, you're not really going to move forward. So, yeah, I've shared most of the things. I might as well share this. One of the first things, very first things that the medicine said to me, the very first time, was no sex without love. That was my homework. I was happy and I was gutted at the same time. Because although it's my preference, it's not, you know, always the way that it happens. But when you follow that guidance and you bring that into your life, that's when you start to learn. That's when you start to question. So yeah, some people will go back to the medicine over and over again for various different reasons, and I think the kind of the fallacy that you'll go and have one ceremony and cure 30 years of bullshit backlog is a high expectation. We're not going to be cured. I don't know if we ever kind of get to a place where we are healed, like chasing healing continually is also not necessarily helpful. Sometimes we have to get to a point where we say, this is where I am, these are the good things, these are the bad things, and I can deal with it and not have to chase that kind of thing, you know. To me, I found that with the ayahuasca in particular can take people up, and a lot of people need a lot of grounding. And I think I'm going to be doing more cacao ceremonies around post-integration, as in really grounding. Let's bring ourselves back, let's share, let's get into community. And yeah, so that's me out of time. Feel free to grab me and have a convo.